go ahead. I'll tell you what I'm going to do here, Jose. I'm going to share my screen. We can go ahead and start taking a look at our presentation window here, and then we'll get it kicked off. All right. Cool. All right. Well, we're a couple minutes past the start time. I guess we'll go ahead and get started here. We got a lot of content to cover. We got some good information we're going to share around kind of this concept around AppSec orchestration within the GitHub platform. And then we'll actually run through an actual demo of the product as well. We got a few polls along the way, so looking to keep it very conversational for everybody here. So by way of introduction, hello everybody. My name is Dan Shanahan, and I'm a field security specialist here at GitHub. I've been with GitHub for about a year and a half, and as Jose mentioned, I'm based in San Diego, currently in Manhattan, but really focus on, in general, working with customers on the West Coast, primarily our enterprise customer space over here.
Hey, and I'm Jose Palafox. I'm an application security executive, which is a fancy title for helping our largest customers here on the West Coast adopt GitHub Advanced Security. I've been with GitHub for 3 years now, and I've been working almost the entire time on this product. So I started pre-launch on GitHub Advanced Security and have been responsible for driving a lot of the integrations that we're going to talk to you about today. I've also spent a lot of time adding secret scanning partners to a different part of our product, but I'm really passionate about this topic and really excited to share this more broadly with you. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Awesome. All right. So this is a learning journey, and part of the learning journey is the implication that there is a journey aspect to it. And so today, what we're going to be focusing on is really kind of these sort of essential components of what we're calling AppSec orchestration on the GitHub platform. Really, it comes down to finding methods for integrating various different application security testing tools inside of the development workflows. So session 1 today is going to be focused on sort of those basics, how it works, how to get started with it. And session number 2, which is going to be on March 3rd next week, we're going to start diving into the scalability of this platform and this idea, right? How do we take the ideas of scanning for vulnerabilities in our applications at the repository level, and how do we bring that up to thousands of applications across large enterprises? Of note, this is a very interactive sort of environment. So what you'll see is there's going to be a button that says raise hand on the in your window there down by the chat. That's a good opportunity for you to share your thoughts along the way. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be doing a couple of polls. So after those polls, you'll be able to answer your questions. But if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, come up on stage, go off of video mute, and share some thoughts with us. Let's see here. Jose, anything you want to add as far as like housekeeping sort of items go?
You'll also see a note at the top that says book a demo. So if you get really excited and want to have a one-on-one conversation with us, feel free to click that, and we'll reach out after the discussion here today.
Cool, perfect. All right, let's talk agenda. So really going to be kind of focusing on 3 primary things, right? Like, why is the first thing we're going to focus on. What's the intention behind this idea of orchestration and consolidation of AppSec tools onto the GitHub platform? What sort of problems are we solving with it? And then we're going to focus a little bit more on GitHub's specific approach here, like what it looks like in sort of the GitHub environment. And then finally, we're going to jump into a demo, right? Like I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to show everybody how it actually works, how to get your hands on it, how to get started with it. So kicking it off with a couple of challenges. These are really the things that we're looking to address with this idea of consolidation of AppSec tools and coordination of these tools within the GitHub platform. Number 1 is going to be the decreased developer productivity. We want to make sure that developers have the world-class, best possible experience that they can as they're writing software and as they're interacting with security testing tools. And the way that we do that is by getting results from various different security testing tools into the GitHub platform, right? Into the GitHub UI where developers are already working. The other piece here is these complex security environments, right? So we want to focus on developers. We want to make sure that developers are very happy and that they're able to be super productive in the way that they're writing software. But we also want to make sure that the application security teams, the teams that are caring for and feeding these tools, that they are simplifying their lives as well. We know, I mean, those of us who have been in the application security space for quite some time know that it can be challenging to maintain these tools. And so, we're also thinking about that as another sort of avenue. Developer productivity. This is really important for us. Stack Overflow, and like why is developer productivity so important for us? Stack Overflow annually puts out a report, or a survey, I should say, and they ask thousands upon thousands of developers what makes you happy and unhappy at work. And out of the top 5 responses that developers have listed for being unhappy while at work, lack of productivity is actually the number one reason that they cite for being unhappy at work. And this is surprising to me because that's, more results than, say, like an unfair salary or an unhealthy work-life balance. But I mean, Jose, you've written a lot of software in the past. Like, can you empathize with this? Can you relate to this? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's that surprising. I mean, I think everybody on the line can probably share, like, when you wake up in the morning, you don't go to work and think, man, I'm going to have a low productivity day, right? You go to work and you want to do your best. And if you can't, because, you don't have access to the right tools, or you can't navigate, new UIs, or you can't find data where you expect to find it. All of those are just frustrating because you're trying to get a task done so that you can, feel satisfied with your contribution and go home. It's no surprise to me that people cite this as their big complaint, but it is good to step back and kind of think about it. Like, context switching is really, really expensive. And so what we're going to be talking a bit, through this session is really, how do we keep developers focus in the platform that they're already working in, which, for many of you is GitHub.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about, like some of the reasons that the developers may run into, like, productivity roadblocks along the way. This really comes down to those complex security environments that I think a lot of organizations are facing nowadays, right? So what we did was we went through and we just kind of like started cataloging, kind of off the top of our heads, the various capabilities that exist within the AppSec space right now. Capabilities, for lack of a better word, I guess. There's quite a few categories out there, as you can see, right? So, for example, static application security testing, the ability to check your source code that developers are writing and look for those kind of common coding mistakes or anti-patterns, right? Things that would introduce like SQL injection attacks and cross-site scripting. Then we've got dynamic testing tools, which are more of a black box sort of testing tool. They test against deployed applications. Software composition analysis, container scanning, et cetera. The list kind of goes on and on. What we're really interested in is taking this sort of list of various types of testing tools and mapping it onto a common software design lifecycle, which is what you see up on the screen here, right? And so the idea behind an SDLC like this is visualizing the process of building, shipping, and maintaining software. And so if you take those classes of tools that we were talking about on that previous page that we were just looking at and start mapping them into the software design lifecycle, you begin to paint a picture of complexity, right? You can start to see where we've got multiple different classes and types of tools that are living in various points throughout this lifecycle. And it could become challenging, going back to that developer productivity concept. The developers getting feedback along from various tools in each one of these categories along each of these hops in the software design lifecycle. They have to go to different separate tools, understand different inputs from these tools. It can be pretty complicated.
Well, it is complicated, Dan. Like, each of these tools is categorized, right? Like, in the code and test bucket, you've got 4 different types of tools there. And each of those needs to happen, within the pull request, or sort of at developer contribution time. I want to check that contribution for a bunch of changes. And so I love that first category of like, 4 different static approaches to looking for different types of risk in code. All of them fit there. So, I think what we're going to kind of work our way through is how do we use a common trigger, when code is moved from the developer IDE environment into a code review or, as a commit on GitHub, pull request on GitHub. What are the types of checks we're going to implement there? And I'm super excited to kind of keep moving through this with you.
Yeah. All right. So and these are the other types of tools that live in this space, right? Like we don't even, as we start to scratch the surface here, right? Like, I mean, the tools that are in kind of that blue group are sort of those base level tools, right? These are going to be the existing types of tools that a lot of organizations. But as you start to mature in this space, you can see that there starts to become a lot of different classes of tools that can be introduced, and frankly, it just becomes a difficult thing to navigate. So let's do this, Jose. Let's run a poll. I'm really interested in getting the feedback from the group here on the call. How many security tools are you currently running with? So think back to all the different types of, and we'll try to scope this to application security testing, right? Like we'll really kind of think about that that space, but try to enumerate those in your environment and give us an idea of how many you have. And then what we'll do is we'll share the results here in just a moment. So we'll let this poll run. And then in the meantime, also, sorry, go ahead, Jose.
Oh, no, we've got a bunch of poll answers coming in here. So we got 1 with 2 and 7 with over 5. So who do you want to hear from? We want to bring somebody on stage and understand kind of what your environment looks like. You want someone with a lot of tools or someone with a few tools?
Good question. Let's go with a lot of tools. But
All
anybody who's interested in kind of sharing a little bit about their environment, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll bring you up on stage, and you can tell us a little bit about what your setup is.
It's security tooling, so people may be shy. They don't want to tell you exactly what their setup looks like. Yeah, that's my guess, but yeah.
All right, we'll give this poll just another couple of seconds here, and then we will we'll go ahead and share the results with the group.
There's a funny comment in chat that we should have a 0 there. Some people got 0 tools. We can help you with that. Click that book a demo button. We'll get you at least 1. It looks like we do have 1 person in Q&A. Let's see how we do this. Oh, here we go. Sam. All right, Sam's going to come on stage and talk to us about his environment. Or Ram. Sorry, Ram. Ram, are you there? You got to unmute yourself. You got to come up with a new video presentation tool on the fly.
Go off video mute as well if you'd like. It's up to you. Maybe he accidentally clicked raise hand.
It could have happened.
I know that moment.
All right, Ram, we were excited you were with us, but we may need to move on. All right. Sorry, Ram. Next time we'll get you up here. Did we publish the results of that poll?
Yeah, there we go. This is surprising, actually. To see that there are so many folks who reported 16 votes, half of the population with 5 or more tools. That makes sense. I can relate to that.
That's a lot of screens to go through, though. I got to have 5 different access rights to different tools. So I got to know how to navigate 5 different UIs. It's a tall order.
Exactly. All right, so let's go back to. Oh, looks like Ram's trying to join again. Let's give him a shot. Let's get Ram up on the stage here.
Approve. There we go.
There he is. Hey, Ram, you made it.
Hey, how you guys?
Good. Thanks for coming on stage with us. So, tell us about your security setup. What are you using?
We use a bunch of things. We are in a hybrid environment. We have some on-prem. We are on GitHub with Advanced Security as well. So, I consider those two. GHAS as 2 tools, right? Dependabot and CodeQL. And then, we have DAS tools on-prem. We also have SCA on-prem for containers because GH doesn't provide that for us. So I mean, there's API security tool, that's coming on board. So there's a various set of tools that we use for specific purposes, and kind of we are sticking to best in breed.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah. I think that's a really great strategy, right? I mean, there's lots of different types of testing tools that are available out there. Choosing the right one for your environment is what you absolutely should be doing, and I think that speaks a lot towards sort of our approach as well, which is like we want teams to be able to bring along the exact right testing tool for their environment, but then we also want them to be able to get the benefit of getting results from that inside of developers, UIs where they're working. We'll share a little bit more about that here in a few moments.
Why did you choose a best of breed approach instead of an all-in-one kind of big platform that somebody could sell you?
I mean, because some of the cases that we saw, the big platform didn't actually, cover all the use cases that we are looking at. I mean, I don't want to pick on, specific platforms, but again, there's always going to be outliers. But end of the day, I consider our team to have to support, what the developers want to do. And in order to do that, we have to be willing to step away from, I want this centralized, I want this one platform approach.
That's awesome. So it sounds like you're trying to be, help your customers, who are the engineers, and let them kind of pick the paved path that works for them. Well, hey, it's been great having you up here. I really appreciate you being brave and coming up and chatting with us. We'll call on you again if you want to join us for the back half.
Thank you. It's been great. Bye.
All right, so let's talk about what exactly is AppSec orchestration, right? What is this idea? How does it work, and sort of what's the value? How are we approaching it from GitHub perspective? So, the category of this type of tooling, I guess, for lack of a better word, platform, really has kind of three things that I think are very important to making make up an orchestration platform. Number one is tooling, and we've discussed this pretty extensively at this point. These are the actual tools that are doing the evaluation of source code and infrastructure as code, whatever the case may be. The other piece is automation. We've got to be able to have a platform that is programmable, that allows us to move data throughout itself, and allows us to do things around programmatic automation of testing, right? That could be triggers for things, that could be data brokering sort of events. We have to have some sort of an automation platform. Within GitHub, that's Actions that does that. And then the final piece is visibility, right? So we have to be able to have a place where we can do a correlation of events into one single spot, where we can kind of get a sense of the overall posture, the security posture of our security environment, of our application environment, but also the ability to get visibility into these events as developers are actually writing software, as testing is occurring during, like, say, the pull request process.
It was really cool when we were working on this. Gartner put out a category called CNAPP, as Cloud Native Security something. But if you go through the categories on that, they're broadly like what you highlighted there, right? Automation being core to orchestrating all of these tools and kicking them off. So it was really exciting to see how that kind of mapped in.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So what's GitHub's approach to it, right? We're GitHub. We're very much a developer-focused organization. This really is kind of the core of what we do. And so out of that, we're approaching it a little bit differently than I think other maybe vendors in the space do. Number one, security as code. We want to make sure that all of the definitions that we have of our individual security testing tools, the times that these are executing, where these tools are executing, is all defined as source code. That allows us to be able to manage it, maintain it in the same way that we would application source code. It's very similar to kind of the change in infrastructure that like cloud native computing has brought up recently over the past 5-10 years, where it used to be servers were individually installed, precious little gems inside of a data center. Now we just describe our entire infrastructure with, say, a Terraform document or like a Kubernetes configuration. And we can deploy it without much thought, right? The other piece, and I've hit on this a couple of times, developer first security. We want to make sure that developers are getting the results that they need when they need to see those results. And then the final piece, and Jose, I know you've spent a lot of time on this. I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on this as well. The open platform aspect of things, right? Being able to integrate multiple different tools, multiple seams in this space.
Yeah, this has been where I've focused a lot of effort, is really around a thing called the Seraph standard, which is an OASIS specification for how static analysis alerts can be exchanged between tools. And so I've had the real pleasure of going out to over 60 plus, tools providers and open source communities that make kind of linters or other specific tools for different scenarios, and ask them to produce Seraph so that we can ingest it into the GitHub platform. And I love our approach here because if a new language were to come out tomorrow, I may not have a security tool that covers it, and I may still want to have some layer of protection. So if that community has a linter and I can write rules for it, then maybe I can create a path for my developers to use it, day one or really early in the process, right? Which is kind of exciting that you have the flexibility to kind of always adopt the newest thing. When infrastructure as code scanning came out as like a category, a couple of years ago, it was just immediate. All of them could feed right into GitHub. And so it's been a fun journey to work on. And I love that you stole my thunder a little from the early DevOps days of working in, Puppet migrations that I came from. I definitely relate to that.
Yep, absolutely. Let's dive into these a little more. So, we were discussing this idea of security as code. There's two benefits that come out of this, right? Number one, the ability to scale out your environment, the ability to, like I said, describe the configurations, right? The settings, the things that need to be shared with these individual tools. If we describe them as code, we can maintain them in a single auditable, like centralized place. We can introduce things like GitOps on top of that, right? In the same way that you would handle maybe like deployment environments, or the same way that you would do, multiple different approaches toward like managing source code in your environment. You can apply that to your security tools as well.
The other piece
is, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it enables. We're shifting left on DevSecOps, exactly.
Here we go. All the buzzwords came out on this slide. We promise we'll stay away from the rest of the
we'll stay away from them in the future. The other piece is automation, right? And these two go hand in hand. We need automation to be able to scale appropriately within our environments. And we just cannot do that if we're maintaining multiple different servers inside of our own data center with individual clicky sort of approaches toward managing those servers. So if we can describe it all as code, we can maintain and manage it and operate it as code as well. So kind of mapping back some of those different tools that we were discussing earlier to the SDLC, what we actually wanted doing here too was taking a moment to figure out which of these tools can be described as code and how they're already integrated within the GitHub platform. So each of these different classes of tools that you see on the screen already have some sort of an integration inside of the code scanning platform, where we can plug these in to GitHub Actions and to GitHub Advanced Security and start seeing results from those. All right, developer first security. What are your thoughts on this, Jose? Tell me a little bit about kind of what you're thinking as far as this concept goes as it applies to our customers.
Well, let's talk about a couple scenarios. Let's say I'm a developer or I work on an engineering team and I want to add a new framework or language to a project. How would I do that in a traditional environment? Do I go to my security team and ask them, or am I empowered to just add that? And I think in kind of a GitHub land, you're able to do a little bit of both. You could just add it and you could be responsible about it, because if you needed to make sure that your static analysis tool also ran, you could go edit the configuration of it and make sure that it's scanning that new language that you incorporated. That's a very self-service way of being a good citizen in your environment. So when I think about developer first security, I want a security program that enables me to do my job effectively and easily, right? And meet the high standard that I hold myself to. Somebody wants to see the other slide one more time, but I think we can keep talking about this developer first security on that one as well.
Was
All
it
right,
this
we'll
one?
leave this up for you. Yeah, let's leave this up for a second. I think people are taking some screenshots. They're paying
Yeah, feel free to grab screenshots. Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of approaching security from a very developer-focused lens is critically important, not just to the happiness of developers, right? Not just in making developers feel as though they're able to choose the right tooling for their environment as well, but for encouraging really solid relationships between security teams and development teams as well. I like to think of kind of the amount of political capital or goodwill that security teams have with development teams as a finite resource, right? And each time that you create a ticket, or each time that you create additional work for developers to go back and solve, say, a problem that a security tool identified, you're expelling, you're expending a little bit of that goodwill with them. You want to make sure that the information that you're giving to developers is timely and is accurate, and is actionable as well.
Let's talk a little bit about cost too. Like, I don't want to drag us away from the technology, but if I'm a developer and I make a mistake and you tell me at the time of a pull request, then I can just fix that issue. It doesn't have to go through a long triage process where someone on the security team reviews it, prioritizes it, talks to my manager about it, then eventually 2 weeks later it makes it back to me as like a new ticket. You know what I mean? I can just fix it immediately if you give me the right direction at the time that I'm making the mistake. So it's cheaper. It's cheaper to fix if I can get the alert early. And you think about me as an engineer as like a part of your security program.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a really good example of what that flow looks like for a developer. So what we've got up on the screen here is a pull request, and just to make sure everyone's super clear on what exactly we mean by that. The idea of a pull request is it's introducing a software change from what we call a branch, or like a separate bit of the code, introducing that software change into the main production code base of your repository. And so the idea with these integrations with advanced security is that we can introduce what we call pull request checks. And that's what you see up on the screen is during this pull request, we're executing scanning tools against the software that's being changed. But on top of that, we're sharing those results within the pull request, and we're doing things. You'll see there's a check failure as a little note that's inside of there. We're also creating gates that allow security teams or development teams to make a decision about whether or not the software should be deployed with these potential vulnerabilities. But I think the key piece here is the collaboration aspect. So you'll see here we found, unalert CodeQL. CodeQL is GitHub's SAST scanning software. CodeQL has found some sort of a problem in this code change. And Geekmasher was the developer who wrote this feature change. CodeQL found this problem, and so he's tagging in other folks, specifically Nick Liffin in this case, and he's asking Nick, hey, do you have any thoughts on what this could mean? This becomes really, really powerful with maybe an engineer who wants to bring along either a security resource to ask a question to, maybe it's a more senior engineer, but to be able to have a spot to talk about and discuss these problems, I think is really valuable, really powerful.
Well, and what's great too is that little 3 dot, over there, next to author or whatever. I don't know if you can hover your mouse over it maybe, but clicking that in the actual UI would give you a link directly to that comment. So if you were onboarding a new engineer and they made a mistake, you could say, here's how I fixed that last week or whatever, right? These all persist in the platform, which is really cool.
Yeah, you've got this durable knowledge that exists and it's available to you kind of in perpetuity, right? So it becomes like a library of solutions that exist out there. I find that sorry, go ahead, Jose.
Oh, I was saying, yeah, Ram was asking us in the chat, what are some experiences and how do we give developers the right context to remediate issues? So I think we naturally fell right into that as we were talking.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great question. And that's actually kind of like a two-part answer there is like, how do you solve these problems? becomes two levels, right? It's either this human kind of conversation that happens, but there's also the tool side of it as well, right? It's very important that the tooling that we have offers suggestions to help us kind of understand what these vulnerabilities are and how to resolve them. In fact, this section here that I've got up on the screen is kind of that next logical progression from within that same UI, where CodeQL specifically here helps to define the data flow. And so as a developer, you're interested in understanding a little bit more about this vulnerability, what the context is there. CodeQL is a very deep sort of data flow engine behind it that allows you to fully grasp sort of how things are working within your application and why there's a vulnerability and what that fix looks like as well. All right, and to shift gears, Belver, back to the concept of an open platform, right? So CodeQL is one tool. CodeQL is our SaaS scanning tool, but code scanning, which is part of GitHub Advanced Security, really is an open API that allows you to surface, exactly like Jose was saying earlier, those Seraph results from multiple different tools inside of the developer's workflows. You get the same sort of experience that you get with CodeQL inside of GitHub, with the same capabilities and the same ability to triage those results. Actually, one last kind of point on this too. Getting data in, which is what we do, via code scanning and via the Seraph integration is very important. But also getting data back out, I think, is equally as important. GitHub Advanced Security has got a really powerful UI that allows you to navigate all the different security findings within your environment. But frequently what we find is customers are very interested in extracting that information back out of GitHub to store inside of like reporting or SIM engines. And the idea behind this is if you can take, say, for example, your vulnerability alerts that have been surfaced for an individual repository, you can stitch that data together in an external platform like Splunk or Sentinel, Datadog, whatever the case may be. You can stitch that data together in that external platform with business data. So then you can begin to answer questions that are, okay, so a manager of a business unit or a director of a business unit wants to know how many security vulnerabilities exist at a critical level across all of the applications that they own. It's very difficult to map that data within the GitHub platform just because it's not got that business logic, that business knowledge associated to it. But if you take the data from Advanced Security, store it in an external platform like that, you can stitch that information together and begin to answer those questions. I'm seeing the chat going very busy over here, Jose. Are there any questions that we need to work on?
No, I've been just answering some questions here. People want to see IAC scanners. They're starting to ask like, hey, what's free here, right? So I think we got to speed on up to demo time because we've whet the appetite. Now we got to serve the meal.
All right. Cool. All right. Before we do that, we'll get to the demo next. I promise we'll get to the demo next. But I do want to kind of get a sense of like what kind of static analysis testing tools are you using in your environment? We asked earlier how many security tools you have, but let's talk about like what kind of categories of tools are you looking at?
SaaS is coming in. Infrastructure as code is coming in. Looking good.
Cool.
Keep filling these out. These are interesting for us, and I think they're interesting for you all to share with each other. So like right now with the poll showing us, and we'll get the poll up here once we get a few more results in. But heavy investment in application security, right? And it's like the first tool in the category, right? These came along a long time ago. But yeah, a lot of investment here in infrastructure as code and container scanning. It's cool.
Cool. I'll go ahead and stop my screen share here. Maybe we can share the results of those polls.
Surprisingly low amount on dynamic. Sometimes I talk with customers about dynamic and it seems like that's the one they're most excited about because it gives them quote unquote true positives, and then sometimes I think the amount of work that it takes to get, all the tests written and things like that sort of becomes overwhelming. So I wonder if that's kind of weighing some of it down, but also exciting to see API scanning, kind of another form of dynamic, even getting a register here, it means that category is starting to grow as well.
Folks are thinking about it. Yeah. I can definitely empathize with the dynamic scanning complexities there. I think it's part of a thorough application security posture and environment, but it is kind of a challenging sort of class of tool to introduce at scale, just because of the applications do have to be deployed, and you got to have an environment to execute these tests on. Very valuable tooling, but without a doubt, there's some overhead. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and we're going to jump back to the screen share over here. Got to find my windows. And then we'll jump into our demo, but I think it's very important that we set the stage of what we're going to be looking at first. So mapping back to our SDLC design that we have here, there's going to be, what I'm going to share is a repository here within the GitHub environment. And I'm going to share with you how all of these different types of testing tools can be integrated inside of a single repository. We're going to be using a few different tools that live in this space. We're going to be using scorecards to check for, like, say, project configuration sort of questions, right? Like the general security posture of our repository. We'll be using Gripe, which will do container scanning for us. Dependabot is doing an SCA sort of role there, looking for vulnerable packages. CodeQL will be doing our SAS scanning. There's actually one other tool that's plugged in here that I don't have depicted, and that's TFSec. TFSec is an open source Terraform security scanning tool, so you'll be able to see the results of that. And then finally, we have listed in the QA, in the integration testing section, it's an API security testing tool called 42Crunch. 42Crunch has a really great free version of a SAST testing tool that will evaluate the OAS specs and Swagger docs in your environment and look for those kind of common configurations or misconfigurations. So we have that integrated as well. Anything you wanted to add here, Jose, before we jump into it?
Now people are starting to ask about how they can get data out. And so this is really cool. As you see all these tools here, all of the results from these are going to get formatted in that Serif format. So we'll normalize all the data, and then we can extract it all into some kind of vulnerability management system or a SIM like you're talking about. So we were in the chat just kind of going back and forth on the Splunk integration, but we've done the same thing with Datadog, with Elastic, with Sentinel. So like all of these have great integrations, and I'm going to go dig up the blog post while you're getting set up here and post that into the chat.
Cool. All right, so we'll jump right into it. Let me set the stage of my very vulnerable repository that I have here. Okay, so what I've done, I've forked this application. It's called Pixie. Pixie's no longer maintained, but the idea behind it is a wildly insecure API. And the reason I chose this is because it's really easy to light up vulnerability scanners with this tool. Pixie has lots and lots of issues in it. You'll also see underneath, let's see here, the app folder, that we've got a Docker file that exists within there. So there's a container that's configured. And we also have some infrastructure Terraform documents here as well. All of these contain lots of vulnerabilities. And so what you'll see is many problems inside of this repo. I want to make sure that we're super clear on like the amount of alerts that you see in this situation is
unreasonable,
intentional. Don't expect to see this count of alerts inside of your own production environments. It will not look like this. Unreasonable is a perfect way to put it. All right, so let's take a look at our security configuration. So again, I'm scoped specifically to the repository here. If we take a look on the left-hand side under the security tab for our repo, you'll see the vulnerability alerts that are listed out. So we've got 78 Dependabot alerts. We can dive into this and see that there's just, many different packages that are being called in that are insecure for various reasons, many of which are critical level, like truly exploitable issues within our environment. These problems need to get resolved, and the way that these get resolved typically is to introduce a newer version of these packages in your environment. Dependabot actually is a really cool feature where it can automatically bump up these versions for you via pull requests. So again, going back to that automation idea, Dependabot's really cool for helping out with that. Let's jump over to secret scanning. We haven't talked much about secret scanning. Before I go into code scanning, secret scanning, the idea behind secret scanning is within the GitHub platform, you have the ability to identify credentials, things that look like authorization tokens and keys, API tokens, things along those lines. Identify those within your application source code, within your repository as a whole, right? Even some of the metadata within your repository. We identify these tokens in your environment and we'll notify you of these tokens. And in fact, we have the ability to actually prevent these tokens from being written into the repository via a mechanism called push protection, which will actually fail Git operations as developers are pushing new code. It's very much a preventative tool that exists versus a reactive tool. And then finally, code scanning. So this is where the rubber meets the road as far as how we get data from multiple different tools into the GitHub platform. So we talked about GitHub Actions and code scanning and advanced security. Code scanning is that mechanism for ingesting the results from these various tools. You can see which tools are included in our environment by dropping down the scanning tools button up here. This gives us the ability to go in and get a sense of like the health of the scans of each one of these tools. So in this case with CodeQL, we can see that we're scanning 79% of the JavaScript files that we have there and get a sense of like the success of the various scans. You can see that Gripe has an issue over here. We've got a problem with it. This is because of a misconfiguration I had on an earlier file, but it gives us a really clear sense of the health and the status of these scans. You can also see the counts of alerts that are associated with each one of these tools here in the tool dropdown. So here we can see CodeQL is 109, whereas DefSec is the underlying name for TFSec. It's the actual engine that exists under TFSec. It's got 22 results. And we can filter those down just by navigating directly to those results and see what the particular problems are there. So in this case, we see an S3 block. It's not restricting public access to a bucket. So in this case, TFSec has given us an alert here, and we have the ability to resolve this problem based on the feedback that it's giving us.
I just want to obtusely hit the nail on the head here. Like when you drop that tools branch down, I mean, this is really cool. You've got all the alerts for a static analysis, for a API testing and fuzzing tool, for a container scanning tool, for something that checks repo hygiene, and for something that checks infrastructure as code. They're all triggered on pull requests, and all of the results come into the same UI. And if you wanted to extract them, you could do that with the same set of API calls. So it's really cool. Like everything kind of flows together. And as Ram was talking to us earlier about wanting to have, a best of breed approach, like that's what we've served up here, right? You can pick the best tool, in each category. And, where, maybe tools are undifferentiated, you can just use an open source one. Like TFSec does a great job of identifying static vulnerabilities. Like, I don't know that I have to, spend money there if I don't want to,
Right. Exactly. I'm glad you called that out. I mean, I think that's a very good way to put it. And I think like kind of the other layer of that too is also, diving a little bit more deeply into that pull request example that you were discussing here. So I created a pull request to trigger CodeQL in this case. And just to be clear, like this can be done with any other tool. It just so happens that it's really easy for me to set this code from true to false and trigger an alert here with this particular problem that I have. So in this case, we're disabling the SE. This is a tool within Angular that allows you to do automatic validation of the content that's coming into your application. I set it to false, so I disabled that capability. If we click on show more details, that's going to bring us to the actual alert, that screen that we were just looking at here. And we have some very in-depth information that's provided by CodeQL. So this is information that gets provided to you as a developer as you're introducing these poor misconfiguration practices that you may be developing with in your environment. This goes back to that idea of collaboration, right? So here I can, Jose, any thoughts on this issue? I can ping Jose directly here, misspellings and all, and start to get his feedback.
Set up. Any pings from Dan goes straight to the trash.
That's right.
I touch this.
Yeah. All right. So let's see here. Any questions in chat as I've been walking through this demo, Jose?
No big questions here, but I think one thing that would be helpful is like let's dive into security overview. Actually, there's a good chat there, yeah. And then maybe you could show folks how to find these tools and set them up within their GitHub repo.
Good call. Yeah, let's go back. Let's finish up this conversation at the repository level, and then we'll bounce up to sort of that organizational level. So again, Actions is what kind of powers all of this, right? Under the covers, we've got GitHub workflows that are configured for within each repository for each of these different tools. We'll come back to this here in a moment, but what I want to share with you is how we add a new tool. I'm going to go back over to my security tab. I'm going to jump back into the code scanning results. And if we click on Add Scanning Tool, this is the way that we can choose as a repository owner which of these different tools we have. In this case, we've got something like 66 different workflows. I'm just going to do a search just for simplicity for Scorecard. Scorecard is an OSSF project, an open source project by the Open Source Security Foundation. It checks for configurations inside of your repository. I'm not sure if you saw what I did there, but I clicked the configure button, and that brings us to an actions configuration page. Here's where we would set any additional settings that need to happen. And once I click commit changes, what this is going to do is create an actions workflow file. Let's jump back to that list of actions workflow files that I already have configured, and we can kind of walk through what these mean, how they work.
Yeah, and
so in this case, I've got.
And if you could jump into that 42 crunch one eventually, because folks want to know, like, what if I have a SaaS service I want to do this with? Like, we're showing you a lot of CLIs, but
yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, perfect example, right? So this configuration is what describes how we handle our security scanning and testing. In this case, we've got like a trigger, right? This is when we do our scan. In this case, it's on push to the main branch and pull request. You can also do it on a cron or API calls or manual configurations. Then we define what the job is. And in this case with 42 Crunch, which is a SaaS service, they have an action that they've built and published that is automatically integrated. So the integration process here is really straightforward. We have to have our token. We provision a token on the 42 Crunch website, right, in their UI. And then we store that as a secret inside of GitHub. And then it uses those authorization keys in order to do the scan that needs to happen in their environment. One thing I think is of note.
Sorry.
Is no, that's okay. That's okay. There's a lot of things to maintain inside of this directory. Today, we're focusing on in our learning journey. We're focusing on sort of this initial baseline configuration on a single repository. I think some of the astute folks on the call though will notice that there's 5 different configuration files inside of this repository. And the question is, how do we scale that? How do we take that up to an organization with thousands upon thousands of repositories? March 3rd, we're going to talk a little bit more about that and different strategies you can use to kind of abstract some of these complex configurations and centralize them using GitHub's Actions reusable workflows. We'll share some thoughts around that.
Yeah, and there was a question here in the chat about that UI screen. And I just want to clarify for folks, if you're using GitHub Enterprise, that page where all of the tools set up was there. That won't be there unless you enable people to use external actions. So that's a configuration setting you as an admin would set.
Yes.
But nobody's able to just like grab all of those and use them unless you've like approved them for internal use.
Yeah, exactly. One other thing, like from a UI perspective, some of the things that you may be seeing on my screen right now may not be deployed quite yet in, say, the GitHub Enterprise Cloud environment. Like, for example, I don't think that this chart is available yet. I don't have the ability to turn this off. So it's unfortunately just because it's like a staff ship environment. You'll see this. This is the direction we're going though. You will see these UI elements here very, very soon. All right, final points. Security overview. This is where we start to get that like high level view of application security posture across our entire environment. As you can see, if we jump into the code scanning section here, all of the various tools that have been plugged into every single one of our repositories is available here for us to, to be able to like associate alerts to and dive into a little bit deeper, right? So we can choose any one of these tools and get some more information about them. We can do some really interesting filtering here as well, right? So if I were only interested in repo : orchestration, now we can focus the alerts here specifically to the repository that we care about. So lots of filtering capabilities available here. Okay, with that, I want to wrap up the demo. Bring it back to our screen here. So let me bring back. Cool. Next week, March 3rd, we're going to go a little bit deeper into how this all comes together. How do we take data out of the platform? How do we scale this across multiple applications, thousands of applications? What kind of tips and tricks and tools are out there to allow us to be able to maintain this at a larger scale?
And you had a question in the chat there. Somebody said, is there any plans to have something that requires workflows? And I feel like that's kind of what the next session is about, right? I mean, we're going to talk about how we scale this.
It's going to be a topic. Yeah. So we can talk about that really quickly. There is this idea of required workflows. We're still working to make that work with code scanning, but we will discuss some options around that. So be sure to tune in on the 3rd, where we'll share some thoughts around that. It's a great question.
Yeah, and somebody asked for an easy button, which I think is also kind of what we're talking about next time. I mean, it's not an easy button necessarily, but by codifying all of the scans and the triggers and how the results flow in code, we can just copy and paste that around, right? I mean, I don't have to reinvent the wheel for every repo I want to run these tools on, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And not just that, we're also working on a literal actual easy button as well for CodeQL. So we'll talk about that one as well. So exciting stuff in that space. Yeah, so feedback. We love feedback. Definitely want to hear from you. What worked with this session? What didn't work with this session? So please, there will be a link in the chat that should show up here in just a few moments. Take a moment, fill that out for us. So it'll be really, really, really helpful. Thank you. Really appreciate you all spending some time with us today. Are there any final questions maybe before we jump off the session here? Anybody else want to take an opportunity to come up on stage like Ram did earlier?
I want to hear from Ram if he's still out there, because I want to know if he's planning to use this Seraph integration. He mentioned he was going to get an API scanning tool, some other tools. So let's see if we convinced him. I don't know if he's out there. He may have left already. Oh, here we go. Maybe. Oh, someone asked, what are you using Gripe for? Are you scanning SBOMs? That's a good question.
Yeah, so in this case, I'm using Gripe to evaluate my Docker file configuration, and it is exclusively identifying vulnerabilities inside of the Docker file configuration that I have. However, Gripe does have a lot of capabilities built into it. For this demo, that's what I was using it for.
Ram, did we get you back? We lost your video, it looks like, so maybe your audio is there. Oh, there
he is. There he is.
Hey, yeah, I mean, API testing is a very, unique thing, right? So you talked about the static aspect. There is also the dynamic aspect, and then there is the runtime aspect. So, again, at least, we are trying to have different tools that are, best in breed for each of those things. I mean, that's just my thought. And especially with the dynamic aspect, a lot of the DAS tools already do that. So, it's a no-brainer there to just, use your current DAS tool to also do the dynamic testing for APIs.
Yeah, and I think that static check, like if you're just looking to like lint a Swagger file, would you find it helpful to get an alert if like a lint check failed back in GitHub like we were showing here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that kind of eliminates the problems that you would get later on.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's cool is you have a lot of flexibility in where and when you trigger these tools too, right? Like we showed all these tools integrating at the pull request level, right? But with Actions, you can actually trigger in like all kinds of different situations. You can be very specific and filtering down to only when certain, code has changed, maybe in a particular directory or with a particular file name, or you can tell it to be manually triggered via things like a Slack bot or something like that. So there's a lot of flexibility on like how you can plug these tools in and at what point they scan, which is pretty cool. Another kind of point on that too is code scanning. Like we're sharing this from an Actions perspective, right? We're sharing what this looks like with GitHub Actions, but a lot of other organizations maybe don't have GitHub Actions. Maybe they're running on other CI/CD platforms. That's okay. GitHub code scanning will accept results from any platform. It's an API. It doesn't really care where you run these tools. It's really easy to do it in Actions, but if that's not where your organization is right now, that's not a problem. We don't have a hard reliance on Actions.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. You're so brave for coming up randomly on like a different tool,
yeah, right?
Yeah, like sharing your house with us. So I really appreciate it. You made this a lot more fun for me.
Cool. All right. So there were a few other questions that came up in chat here. Jose, it looks like you caught one or two of them.
Yeah.
So how can we?
Gripe. So let's chat a little bit about Gripe in more detail. So there is a tool called Dependency Graph, which is a part of our SCA offering, Dependabot, and for SBOM data or for information about dependencies that maybe are set during the build process, environment variables or something like that. You can plumb the data back into the dependency graph from that kind of later on tool. So if you have a container and you scan it with Gripe and you want to know like what are all the Docker layer dependencies, you can use Gripe and then put that data back in Dependabot. It's a very similar workflow to what we showed you with code scanning. And then it would allow you to, eventually extract like a list of all of the dependencies. So if you're building an SBOM, you could do that with the dependency graph API. So we may come back and want to have another session on how to do that, but I'll go look for the docs and paste those in there so you can kind of get an idea of how that would work. Really similar flow though. And then another one, Dan, maybe you can take while I'm kicking through there is, one of these next ones that's coming. Do you have the chat feed up?
Yeah. So I want to talk real quick about to try to answer Ping's question here. So Daniel, I see your question around like avoiding public Docker images. Maybe Jose, you can share your thoughts in chat on that. But Ping, I want to talk a little bit about like the ideas around other developer-friendly sort of aspects of the platform and this idea of not wanting to throw a lot of issues at developers. You're right with that. That is 100% the approach that I think you should be taking. I think everybody should be taking. And I see the customers that I work with that I feel like are some of the most successful AppSec teams are very, very particular on the types of alerts that they get in front of developers. They want to make sure that only the most 100% likely true positive results with actionable resolution steps are showing up in front of their developers. This is a really great platform for enabling that because with CodeQL, for example, there's effectively infinite flexibility in the types of checks that you're going to be looking for. You can very much choose to only execute like very specific vulnerability checks within the source code and only raise those alerts. You also have the ability to choose, like maybe you don't want to have a pull request integration on each of these tools. That is no problem whatsoever. You can store all these alerts in like an offline sort of out of band storage location and then feed results to developers as it makes sense in that situation as well. So really it comes down to the flexibility aspect of this, right? Being able to choose how you want to get information in front of your developers. But I really will double click on that idea. Reduce the amount of noise you're getting to them. That's key.
So Paul asks, GitHub and Microsoft are in such a unique intersection between a code repository and a cloud service provider. No other vendors are in that intersection. Any thoughts on leveraging that unique situation? Yes, I have a lot of thoughts, and like you can see the synergy is like right there. And I think I'll have to leave you with a little bit of a tease and just say, I know our product teams are working hard on kind of vetting that story out. So I don't want to spill the beans early, but there's multiple Microsoft product offerings that have been announced. One's called Defender for DevOps, and that works really tightly with GitHub Advanced Security and a lot of the Azure data that you're getting. Azure Cloud, Defender for Cloud UI, I think gets some of the secret scanning notifications now. So the integration efforts between our tools are underway, but it's also important to remember that GitHub is kind of an independent, estate, right? We're not like a Microsoft company necessarily. We want to have the best integration we can with whatever tool you're using, and that's why we've taken this open platform approach, right? It's not a walled garden on GitHub at all.
Great,
cool. I think we are
out of time here. Yeah. Well, thank you everybody for spending an hour with us. I hope you find it informative. And like I said, please do join us on March 3rd, where we're going to kind of continue this conversation, share some other tips and tricks and thoughts.
Thanks everybody for coming.
All right. Thank you all.